Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Orthokeratology Practice Management Crash Course. All of us that are participating this evening feel really honored that you're taking time out of your busy lives and schedules to spend an hour with us so that we can discuss what is really a very fascinating topic in today's eye care. A couple of things I'd like to go over first of all before we get started. First is we want to be able to communicate with you and have the opportunity, when indicated, to ask questions of our presenters this evening. We want you to do that by going through the chat box. And then in the chat box, we will have filtered out some of the questions into ones that are, if they're asked more than once, and then we will address those towards the end of tonight's presentation. The speakers tonight are fantastic, and for those of you that have had the opportunity to hear them before, you know that you're in for a big treat. We have Dr. David Kading. Dr. Kading is from the Seattle area where he has 3 separate practices, and those practices revolve around taking care of patients in specialty contact lenses and dry eye and other aspects of eye care. Also, he has a residency program there, which is terrific. So there are residents that come through every year. And because of that, they do quite a bit of research as well. And for those of you that have not seen him or read things that he has written, which is a lot of them, maybe you've heard him in his podcast series. And although he's got a couple of them, he's been involved in the myopia podcast, which comes out weekly and really relates to tonight's topic, is the one that I think is just fantastic. Dave, welcome.
Thank you, Craig.
It's really terrific to have you here tonight, and I'm looking forward to this discussion. Our second participant is Dr. Azinda Morrow. And Azinda grew up in the California area, went to the University of California at Davis, later on took her optometry training at SUNY in New York, then spent a year not too far from where I live in Chicago area for her residency program, then went back to SUNY as faculty and helped to educate a lot of those great students that come out of that program. And over the last year and a half or so has gone back to California, where she is part of a multi-specialty optometry practice. Azinda, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
It's wonderful to have you here, and I hope you're getting acclimated to your new home in California as well. So here's the format that we're going to go with tonight. We have a series of different questions. I will pose the question and let each of you just talk a little bit about what they are from your perspective. The point of interest tonight is the practice management aspect and in Ortho-K and that part of your practice, myopia management, although I know we might get a little bit off on a tangent or two as we go along. So here's the first question, and that is, why myopia management, and why or what does this offer to you in your practice? Dave, you want to start off with this?
Yeah, so we have been loving doing myopia management for almost 15 years, and so this isn't a new thing for us. Myopia management, I think, as you said, is a 30-year overnight success. We've really started doing myopia management a lot more in the eye care world in the last couple of years, but it's been around for a long time. Craig, although I've been doing myopia management for 15 years, since I graduated, we were doing, maybe at most 50 patients a year, up until a couple years ago. And now we do hundreds and hundreds of them. But I kind of had this epiphany, as a full scope optometrist, I was seeing patients with glaucoma and macular degeneration and retina disease. And it just all of a sudden hit me one day, what is the refractive error of all of these patients with all this disease? And my goodness, we're working so hard to manage these patients at the end. What are we doing at the beginning? Yeah. So as I was saying, the real crux was we were seeing so many of these issues from patients at the end of their lives that we had to, really dive in at a deeper level of how do we help these patients early on. And that at that point, we went from just kind of dabbling to we really have to interject for this. In addition to that, we saw how if we could really, really help impact these patients' lives, how this could be a really, really financially beneficial component to our practice as well. And so anytime we can do things truly in the best interest of our patients, it'll be very, very beneficial for our practice. And myopia management is no exception to that rule.
Okay, great. Dr. Morrow, Azinda, what do you think?
So I think, as Dave was talking about, myopia has kind of course, been around for a very long time. But even, I graduated 6 years ago, and I feel like even in 6 years, a lot has changed. The students at the colleges are getting a lot of exposure to myopia management for the reasons that Dave was talking about in terms of seeing these patients with complicated eye disease later in life. So even in the last few years, technology has changed, and the lives that the kids that we're seeing has changed drastically compared to their parents. And so it's just becoming more and more prevalent in all of our populations to manage these types of patients. So I think it's a really interesting and cool and rewarding type of care that I really like doing compared to a lot of the other types of care, to be completely honest. But it's a great way to make sure that we're setting our kids up for success in the future and avoiding all of those long-term complications. And to echo, talking about what it brings to your practice, I think one thing that's very unique is that, depending on your interest in myopia control as a practitioner, of course, everyone who's on here, I think, has a lot of interest, but I think there is unfortunately a lot of practitioners out there who are not all that interested, or possibly only offering a couple different modalities of myopia management, some of which are very outdated. And so I think it's a really unique way to set your practice apart in terms of offering the best care for your patients possible with the newest types of lenses offerings, and just staying up to date on the literature in a way that many other practices are not doing.
Yeah, and Craig, may I just jump in? I think she really brings up a great point with regards to that. And I think what also this really does bring to your practice is something that sets you apart, right? This is something that not a lot of people are doing. It allows us to expand the scope of the patient base that we're seeing. Many kids are not coming into eye care practices at all. And so if we are able to start driving more kids into practices, we'll be able to be detecting other things, not just myopia management, but it opens the door for us to really be expanding our practice. The other great thing is how this really expands things for our team, right? Now we feel like we're doing preventative medicine, not just end of the road medicine for those patients who, are really struggling to see. But we are doing preventative medicine. And, in a world where we feel good about the workplace that we go to, that's something that people really, really love to be a part of, is that preventative aspect. And when they can see, especially with orthokeratology, this kid is free of glasses and free of contact lenses, let alone the fact that we're slowing down the progression, and these kids come in year after year, and their parents and them go to the front desk or work with the technician. And for the first time in 3 years or 4 years, Johnny's prescription isn't getting worse and worse and worse. And how excited that is, that really does a lot for the practice, and it does a lot for the team in the practice.
Absolutely. Those are really excellent points. So, we talked about the different modalities that we have in general, but we know that there are the use of soft lenses, of course, the use of atropine, soon to be the use of spectacle lenses, and of course, Ortho-K. And then you could say, and then there might be some combination method as well. So let me start with Dr. Morrow on this, in that when you're going through your internal protocol in the practice or in your mind, whether it's your protocol or the practice protocol, whatever it might be, when is Ortho-K the go-to for myopia management? versus the other ones I just mentioned?
Yeah, so I think one great thing just to add into that is that one amazing thing that we all have is a lot of options, which I think can be great. One thing I try to really encourage the patients and the families that I talk to is that, there's been a lot of research on all of these things. And so picking the one that you're most excited about, that you're most enthusiastic about, those things will really set us up for success on both sides. But I think for me personally, Ortho-K is a great option. I have a specialty lens background, so to me, it's the most fun personally when I get to see the patients more often, get to know them better, and fit them in a custom lens. I think in terms of like picking a patient profile, I've had some patients as young as 5 doing Ortho-K and some that are a little bit older. So I think that age-wise, we have a large range. But I try to tell my patients that have very active lifestyles that Ortho-K would be a really good option. The other thing that I think is great for Ortho-K in comparison to soft multifocals is that, a lot of all maintenance can be done at home. And so for a lot of the patients in my practice currently, a lot of the parents are very hesitant to have their children take on all of the onus of caring for the lenses when they're out and about at school or at practice or wherever they may be. And so parental oversight is something that a lot of the parents that I work with now are really enthusiastic about, in that if the patient themselves didn't necessarily want to do all the lens handling, insertion removal, that the parents can be involved in that.
Okay, that is terrific. Dave, can you build on that at all? And in particular, could you answer the question, is there a particular time when you would think Ortho-K would be best? Age, prescription, some of the other things that Azinda talked about, lifestyle, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I'll build on that and to echo just to kind of get us started. I think that the beauty about getting back in myopia management is how many great options that we do have. That being said, I think everybody kind of develops, a preference of what may be best for them. I've got some people that have been on my podcast who they are just crushing it with some of these other options that are out there. In our particular practice, about 80% of our patients are in orthokeratology or orthokeratology combined with something else. And that isn't because the other options are not good, but because we just find that in our patient base, orthokeratology tends to fit in really, really well. Where we're really, really focusing in on that is particularly the prescriptions that are under 4. That doesn't mean we can't go over 4, but that's kind of the sweet spot for us. In my residence, that's kind of the sweet spot where we get started. When we get over 4, we just have to have a little bit of a different conversation around how good or bad the vision may be. With the designs that we have today, it's not uncommon for us to be able to expand beyond that 4 or a 5. Also, we're kind of wanting that astigmatism number to be under 2, and 2 may be a little bit high for some people, but when it comes to astigmatism, Craig, it's not so much the amount of the actual cylinder value, but it really relates to the elevation difference between the steep and the flat meridian. And that elevation, we then move towards a toric orthokeratology, not a toric like we think of with soft toric lenses, but a lens that has different curvatures. And what's really surprising about this, Craig, is I remember I started fitting occasionally a toric lens years ago, but in the last 5 years, in 2017, right around 100% of our patients were in spherical Ortho-K lenses. Last year, over 60% of them were in a toric parameter. And in some ways, these lenses become easier to fit because we don't see as much of the distortion of that. So we're looking for those patients who have a corneal elevation difference, and that moves us towards that. So if it gets up above 2 or 3 or 4 diopters, those really become pretty tricky, and those are challenging in the soft lens arena as well. So that's kind of that sweet spot, 4 diopters, -2 or so. And those ones work really, really well for orthokeratology. As far as age, certainly we're doing myopia management on 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. And depending on the child, we'll get started on orthokeratology even in the 4 or 5-year-old range. Beyond that, it's just hard to really wrangle the kid down enough that we're able to get them trained and their parents trained in ortho-K. But for no reason, if the kid is gung-ho for it, usually around 4, 5, 6 years of age is where we'll start fitting orthokeratology. And that tends to be a little bit easier for the patient and the parent with regards to myopia management versus putting them into a soft multifocal lens. And I have to echo Azinda's comment about when a kid is in orthokeratology, the parent is in complete control of the lens wearing experience because it's under their roof. And so many of our patients really, really do appreciate that and like having it. It's also great for sports, particularly swimming, right? And we're just coming out of the summertime where so many of our patients are spending more time in the swimming. We have a lot of competitive swimmers in our practice. And so Ortho-K just fits in really, really well with those types of patients, but certainly not a reason to not get into myopia management. But I think we'll find that orthokeratology has really changed over the last couple of years, and it's far easier to do than it used to be.
Yeah, for sure. One of the comments that you made that strikes home to me is the comment relative to the designs for astigmatism. That more and more, I think the manufacturers are echoing what you said, that the orders are over 50% or so torics versus, 5 years ago, as you said, it was really next to nothing. So those are really excellent points for us to be able to consider. Now, because this is a practice management discussion tonight, and we're not spending a lot of time talking all the technical stuff of fitting and those kinds of things, that's not our goal for this evening. We want to continue on this path of talking about how we position Ortho-K in the practice, that is compared to the other modalities, the other kinds of systems. And then we'd also like to, secondary to that, have a bit of a discussion about fees. Now, granted, in this format, we're not going to talk about actual dollars. We're going to use examples or ranges. They all vary dependent on the demographic of one's practice, where you live across the country. There's all those kinds of factors. And so we have a couple of things that we want to be able to discuss regarding this and the calculation of those fees. But if we could start with, how do you determine the product positioning for Ortho-K? Meaning, is this a premium product within the practice, or how does that compare? David?
Sure. I kind of love to hear Azinda's perspective on this. I'm happy to give my 2 cents on it, but I've been curious of her, and I don't mean to subvert you, Craig, but can she go first? I want to hear what she has to say.
Absolutely.
Sure. So I think that, of course, like any myopia management option, because some kids will be able to use some, but not others. I do think of Ortho-K as kind of like the pickiest one, right? Kind of to echo Dave's comment from before, refractive error is much more limited versus the other options that we have. And so with that, in addition to the fact that we have a custom-made lens, we're seeing the patients and their families a lot more often. I guess if you want to put the word premium on it, you could. But I think that, I try to, with any modality of myopia management that I offer to the patients, of course, I think with fees for Ortho-K across the board, they're going to be higher. But one thing that I think is really important, and I think later on we talk a little bit about communication with our families, is just making sure that we're adding value to this. So, when I talk to the families about Ortho-K, I'm like, hey, I'm going to see you, day 1, week 1, maybe week 2, 1 month, 3 months. I'm like, I'm going to see you all the time. And so I try to tell them that, that even though it's a higher cost, the accessibility to, touch points in their care is a really high value for them, despite maybe the initial sticker shock that they feel. So yes, in our practice as well, orthocare management is more costly, but I think that, like I said, it's important for the patients to understand what they're getting with those costs.
Yeah. Yeah, I really love that. And, I think when it comes to orthokeratology as compared to contact lens fitting for adults, or orthokeratology carries a premium price to that. But yet, when we think about, say, things in the dental model, when I go to my dentist, or I'll use my daughter, when she goes to the dentist, what it costs her to sit in the dentist chair per half hour is a heck of a lot cheaper than what the orthodontist for her braces costs her when she sits there. And the reason is because I see that value in my kids' teeth getting straighter, right? So there really is that value that plays such a big part in determining fees. And what we're really doing is we're giving an incredible quality of life for these patients. And it takes a little bit more time. It takes a little bit more costly, product versus, say, a pair of single vision spectacle lenses. And it takes a little bit of expertise on our part, but there is an incredible value that these patients get from what we get. And so, Craig, we do something a little bit weird in our office is we don't sell orthokeratology soft multifocals or atropine. What we provide our patients with is myopia management. And within the realm of our myopia management umbrella, there's various different treatments, but the cost is the same for myopia management, regardless of what treatment we go to for the patient. And it's because we're not selling atropine. We're not selling soft lenses. We're not selling orthokeratology. We are selling myopia management. And if midway through the year, we need to refit the patient, we need to switch them from one modality to another, or we need to add atropine, it's all included in that cost because we are selling myopia management. And our practice is part of the Treehouse Eyes. And that has been really, really helpful for helping to understand and train our staff and get everybody on the same page about how to do that really, really effectively. With regards to positioning, how it goes into play, it isn't a higher price than anything else. When it comes to our adult patients, it's a premium over other products. But we sell myopia management for kids.
Well, let me ask you guys this. You mentioned orthodontist and orthodontia. The one beauty of orthodontia is that there are so many generations of parents that have gone to the orthodontist, they already know the fees. So there's not this sticker shock because I know it goes up a little bit from one generation to another, but the price shock, if you will, is not there as much. So my question to the two of you, have we reached that point yet in ortho-K or myopia management that when a patient has been referred in by a friend from the soccer team or a parent from the hockey team or whatever it might be, has the parent already had an idea what those fees are because they've had this discussion with another parent?
I think it just varies on the family. So I wouldn't say that like across the board, everyone's like, oh yeah, I know that it's going to cost X, Y, and Z for this type of service. One thing that our practice, we're in Silicon Valley, so we have a lot of patients and families who are in tech. And so one thing is, of any community is that you're going to talk to one another about what your kids are doing and what you're doing, and what your friends' kids are doing. And I think that one thing that's very interesting in our practice is that we do have a lot of parents who come in and they're like, I want Ortho-K in a way that I hadn't, heard when I was at the college at SUNY. So it's interesting that, a lot more families are starting to hear about the technology, are interested in the technology, and they're like, oh, like 3 kids on my, my kids' basketball team are all using this and we want it for our kid too. So I think that's something that's really interesting, that's unique and different, and maybe potentially setting the scene for the future.
Mm-hmm.
So that part's really interesting. And I think the other thing is that this particular community that I'm in now, a lot of the patients unfortunately do have very high myopia. And so that's one thing that when they do bring in their children, they're like, if I had known this was an option for me, or if I had been given this kind of technology in my early years, they're like, I would have done it too.
Sure.
So I think that, from, both sides of that, we're seeing technology impacting our kids earlier, but we have all of these families who are in tech now and, talking to one another and learning more. And I think that accessibility to information is growing as well. So there are a lot of patients in my current practice who are very, willing and excited from the get-go, but I wouldn't say that it's necessarily true everywhere or across the board.
Sure. Excellent.
Yeah, Craig, it's kind of interesting how it really breaks out into that. Is we have all across the spectrum, just like every single one of the people that are listening, we have people who say, I've never heard of this, right? This is complete. So we still hear that every single day.
Mm-hmm.
But we also have the people who are coming in, and Nick Despeditis is fantastic in this. And he talks about how when he has that patient and their parent who has 36 questions, it doesn't bug him. His fees are appropriate, so he can spend the time with the patient. And he knows that that is the patient who's going to tell every other parent that is out there. And they're also going to tell the other parents what the cost is. So when those other parents come in the door, it's surprising. We had one yesterday, right? And like we had to say anything because the patient knew all the answers already, because that parent that we had spent all this time with, right, and we thought was a real pain, they had already answered all the questions and referred all those other people in. And it really becomes difficult, Craig, to do that internal marketing. And I, again, have to tip my hat to Treehouse on this, because this is something they really, really have helped us and so many other offices do, is that consultation that you have with the patient and helping to change the family tree of myopia for families. And like, we can change this for you so that 10, 20, 30 years down the road, we're having those conversations like orthodontics, right? So we just need to have this be a part of what we're doing, and making that conversion when the patient is in the office, but also for the patients who are in the office, having the right words said to them so that then they go out and become incredible ambassadors for you. Your marketing should really go down as time goes on, because your patients should do all the marketing for you.
Excellent.
But we're not there yet.
No, not yet. Not yet. So before we move on, we've had a couple of questions come in from the chat that I think we are perfect to address here. In particular, they relate to where the insurance companies and their reimbursement lies relative to Ortho-K and myopia management. Either one of you want to address that?
Yeah, so at this point, as far as I know, and the insurance contracts that you're signing are different than the ones that I'm signing, but so far we have had no real insurance coverage really hitting the mark. There's one insurance company that's playing a little bit, but for the vast majority, myopia management as a treatment is not being covered. There may be some insurance companies which may be giving money to use for spectacles or contact lenses, and you may be able to apply that towards the overall cost that you have. But there are some big vision care plans that are out there, and this is where you need to go and read your contract, where they specifically say you're not allowed to do orthokeratology on a patient. They just have something against it. Or you're certainly not allowed to use it for myopia management, and is really discriminatory against helping these patients out. And so in those cases, we are not able to use patients' insurance in any way, shape, or form. And that's okay. The services that we're providing are a lot higher level than a pair of spectacle lenses, and so they need to be compensated at that. And if an insurance company does come into this, we need to demand that they're appropriately compensating us. But as far as I've seen it, with a very few exception of one insurance company here or there, most are not in the game at all.
Yep. Zinda, do you concur?
Yeah, totally agree. I think insurance is behind the curve on this one, and hopefully, right now, as more, of our treatment options start to get FDA approval, which hopefully, now that that door has been opened, my hope is that in the future that is a possibility. But yeah, right now they're behind the curve on this one.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more specifically about fees for just a second. I always used to kid that the way that fees were normally determined for an eye care provider's office is by this very sophisticated mathematical model called the Heineken method. And the Heineken method was you go to the annual optometric state convention and you belly up to the bar and you order a Heineken and you turn to the eye doctor next to you and say, hey, what do you charge for Orthocare? And then depending on what those fees are, you might change your whole office policy before Monday. But what I'd like to do here is to actually add a little bit more sophistication into all of that if we can, in that Dave Kading has really put together a very nice mathematical spreadsheet for us to be able to use to kind of calculate in particular, and Dave, you'll have to explain this, but in particular, looking at the impact of myopia management on the practice and the impact ultimately of the revenue and net income to the practice.
Yeah. So Craig, as we're getting into this, there's a couple of things that we need to keep in mind. Number one is we're looking at doing myopia management in our practice. We cannot be thinking about doing 30 patients a year. We really need to be into the hundreds of patients a year. The reality is that there is, say, 3 million myopic children out there. And I actually think that number is way low. I think it's way higher than that. But if there's 3 million myopes out there and 10,000 optometrists decide that or eye care providers decide that they're going to go in to myopia management, that would require us to all see 300 patients a year. And there's certainly not 10,000 people that are doing it so far, let alone the people that are doing it most of them are doing 100 or less. So may I just encourage you that you've got to be thinking, how can I do this at scale? The second thing is when you're looking at what your fees are for things regarding myopia management, a couple things to keep in mind. Number one is figure out your revenue per encounter. And how you do that is count the number of encounters you see for a day. You see the amount of money that came into the bank for that day and divide those two together. I like to do that on a monthly basis in my practice to see about what my revenue per encounter is. And that means that if I saw a myopic patient and I saw them 3, 4, 7 times a year, whatever it may be, I need to charge that revenue per encounter times the number of encounters I'm anticipating seeing them at minimum, just to hit the number of my revenue per encounter that's normal. However, myopia management is a higher value product, and so there should be a premium that is added on to that, like it would be for any other custom service that you're doing. So that's how I determine the fee for what I'm going to be charging their patients. And we have some numbers here, right, Craig, that we just kind of made up for this. So these aren't the numbers that I charge patients. They're not the numbers that Azenta charges patients, but they're just here for the sake of conversation. So let's say that in the first number here in the green, that you're going to have 100 myopia management patients in the first year. That would be a fantastic goal. That is less than 10 patients a year. Why don't we start with that number being 50, Craig? Can you move that to be 50? That's a little less ambitious number, but certainly would be fantastic if you got there. And then the next question is, how are you going to grow your new patients every single year? We have here 15%. Let's change that to 25%. And then the next question that we want to be asking is, what percentage of the patients are you going to lose every single year? So let's say you saw 100 patients last year as new patients. Next year, 75% of them are going to come back. So you lost 25% of the patients. That would be this next number. If you have a differential for your new versus your established patients, you can enter this into the calculator. And we have this available for people to download. But what do you charge a new patient? What do you charge an established patient? And then what would be the breakdown of your orthokeratology or your soft multifocal lenses, say MiSight or NaturView or whatever you may be using? In this particular equation, we put 75% Ortho-K, 25%, and a rough dollar amount of what your cost of goods might be for orthokeratology versus soft multifocals. Craig, let's go to the first year and let's walk us through. So up above, we put that we were going to be seeing 50 new patients this year. This is the first year we're doing myopia management. So we saw 0 established patients in myopia management. Because we charged $2,500 as listed up above, we generated $125,000 for doing myopia management for new patients, $0 from doing established patients, total revenue $125,000. And over on the right-hand side, you can see what the cost of goods was for that. And so our profit here is a pretty good profit. Again, this is across many different visits. This isn't just one visit and you're done. The beauty about established patients, though, as you would agree, Craig, is these patients tend to not be needing you as much. You may still see them for an axial length. You bring them into the office. But if their Ortho-K is pretty good, you may not need to see them for the 3 or 4 visits that you did in the first year. You can schedule a technician-only visit for axial length measurements and make sure that they're really good. So now we're growing our new patients by 25% this next year. So last year we saw 50, and this is in our second year. We're growing by 25%. So in our second year, we're seeing 63 new patients, and only 25% of our patients dropped off. And so of the 50 established patients, only 38% came back. Now, if you're doing myopia management really well and you've got a good system established, we've got a great system that Treehouse has helped us with, that should be higher. But let's just assume that you lose some. Now we've got a total of 100 patients in myopia management, generating 156 from new patients, 56 from established patients. In that 1 year, from 1 to 2 years, we've gone from $125,000 to $212,000. And you can see the cost of goods is also doubled because of the number of patients here. So this just continues to go on. You can see that you're nearly at 500 patients after 7 years, and that's presuming that you're growing at a modest rate of 25% a year, and you're still losing 25% of the established patients. So this really is a motivator of why we can add this into our practice, and it can really be a practice builder. I hate to bring up, but in that 7th year, under these conservative numbers, your total revenue is $885,000 from doing myopia management by seeing less than 500 patients. 270 of those in that last year are established patients who are, for the most part, on cruise control, and you're seeing them for maybe axial length and whatnot. Some of them are moving away. Some of them are, growing out of myopia management, and that's where you're losing patients. But these are pretty conservative numbers. I would say I hear revenue numbers from practices all over the country. And what we're charging here is definitely within the lower end of myopia management for most practices. And so this is a really conservative calculation that we've just done here, but certainly a motivator on the revenue side, not to mention the fact that 463 children by that 7th year are not going to be increasing their risks nearly as high for macular
Definitely.
degeneration, glaucoma, and retinal disease.
Yeah. This is terrific. And as Dave said, it is going to be available through the sponsor of tonight's presentation, which is Euclid Vision Corporation. And they would be happy to be able to share this with you. And Dave, this is really nice work that you've done here. Very helpful, I think, in these calculations. No matter where you want to start, you could start with 10 and still be able to see where you're at, and extremely helpful. And I think where it really becomes quite helpful as well is when you want to get to the point where you try to think, do we need an Ortho-K coordinator now? Do we need some special staff? Well, you have the numbers that can help justify exactly what would happen only in this modality, not, even without including the rest of them. So really, really fantastic. So I'd like to just move on then for a second, and that is to talk a little bit about how we work together with the companies that we are purchasing products from, in particular, specialty lenses, and for tonight's conversation in particular for orthokeratology. And Zinda, I'll start with you. What is the process? How do you build up a relationship with a specific company? And what do you look for from that specific company to be able to be a partner vendor for your practice?
Yeah, I think, depending on where, what your practice is currently doing in terms of myopia management, of course, it can take a little bit of time to build up a relationship with a specialty manufacturer. But I think that all the companies that I've worked with for Ortho-K and otherwise are very helpful, very eager to help new practitioners who are learning their lens inside and out. So I think that consultation is one of the biggest things that I look for personally when I'm choosing a specialty lab, is just making sure that there are people on the other end, on the manufacturing side, who are very knowledgeable about their lens, who are very informative, who can offer very helpful tips to you. And I think that that's something that, there may be some companies that have better consultants than others. And so for me, consultation is a really key part of helping me, especially now managing my more complicated fits when things aren't going necessarily as expected, having those difficult conversations and hearing the expertise from these companies. The other thing I think is worth considering, of course, and this kind of echoes what Dave was saying about, your cost of goods, is, what kind of warranty period does your manufacturer have? How many exchanges can you make with your lens in that amount of time? Those kinds of things, especially if you are starting out doing Ortho-K and aren't quite comfortable, you may need more lenses and exchanges. And so that's something to definitely take into consideration as well when picking a manufacturer.
That's terrific advice. That I've been in specialty contact lenses my whole career, and I will attest that behind every specialty lens expert, there's really good consultants. Because that's how that the input that a consultant can provide to the practice, a consultant may be talking to 50 different practitioners and about 50 or 60 different patients per day. So something that is unusual for us clinically may not be at all for them. Dave, before we move on, do you have any other comments here?
No, I echo that all the way. And the real key here, and I've written about this in a lot of my writing, is if you do not hang up the phone and feel like a hero then you need to find a different laboratory. The reality is that they are there to help you be successful. And if you don't feel like they're helping you in that, then you need to find something else. We've been able to, over the years, use a lot of different orthokeratology lenses. And what I'm looking for is a simplistic approach for the vast majority of my patients. And so the lens that we're using right now, it's empirically fit, and we use that on the vast majority of patients. We're able to do it very easily with a simple K reading, an HVID, in the RX for the patients. And if we want to send in the topographies to the patient, to the consultant through their portal, which our laboratory has a great portal for that, and we use Euclid. That portal then connects us to the consultant, and if I want to jump on the phone, the consultant can look at the topography, and it's linked right in with my topographer. So they're coming up with constantly new methods and ways to streamline that process. Now, there's going to be some ortho-K patients that you decide to take on, that the -10s, -5 cylinder patients. And that may, it may involve something a little bit more complicated. And we use a different laboratory for that, where we have to go in and custom design everything. But I don't feel like I need to do that on most patients. And so it's a simplified approach, easy consultation, and then the return policy needs to be really, really set up. In fact, the vast majority of the lenses, we don't necessarily even have to return. They just send us a new set of lenses to improve that. So it really is that streamlined approach that makes us successful.
Yeah, partner vendors are really critical to the flow within a practice, whether it's on the spectacle end or the contact lens end. When you have custom made to order, it's really, really quite critical. We're going to jump into questions in just a minute. I have just a couple of things that I wanted to mention for our sponsor for Euclid Vision Corp. They put together a nice myopia management implementation system that their practice management team, led by Christy Yee, can help you in your practice to be able to understand much better how to really implement myopia management with some kind of particular system. And I think that this can be extremely helpful in the practice. This is also available by simply contacting the Euclid Corporation folks, and they are glad to be able to help you in this particular journey. So what I would like to do for the next few minutes that we have this evening is to go through in rapid fire form, Dave, that some of the questions that have come up. This is kind of a quick, interesting one, and that is, either does active duty military allow Ortho-K today?
Not sure.
Yeah, I have not heard that they have not. There may be some specifications around pilots and so forth, but I have not heard that it is not. But I'd have to check with anybody. But right. I haven't had any of my patients say, "I'm military, I can't do that."
Right. So often for adults, military adults, the Ortho-K procedure is done to get them in, right, so that they can pass the uncorrected vision test. But what limitations there would be once you're in, I don't think we know, except for some of the things you're talking about, Dave, relative to the pilots. Here's one as well. Do either one of you offer a referral fee for current patients who bring in new myopia management patients?
Our office does not do that. I'm not sure exactly why the partners of the practice I'm at have decided to or not to do that. But like I said before, whether you're doing it or not, most of the parents are so happy with the level of care and the value of what you're offering that they are referring for you, kind of like what Dave was saying before too.
Yeah. So we kind of have all that kind of worked out within our treehouse program of how we do some of those sort of things. We are willing to pay an enormous amount of money to get somebody started in myopia management. My marketing budget is through the roof because I want to grow myopia management really, really high. And Treehouse helps me do that. And so absolutely, I'm happy to give a referral to a patient. I'm happy to give a reduced cost to a sibling. And, from any way that I can get one of those patients in, I'm happy to do that. And then we just reduce the cost of the first year for the patient. And if it's an established patient, you can give them a discount on their next year's myopia management.
Yeah. Okay. I think that those are common methods, right, to be able to offer. Do you use any other myopia management kind of tool, marketing tool, for instance, that you would use to reach more patients? Like there are some, like one that comes to mind is like Hoot, that is built around providing myopia management tools.
Our practice actually doesn't. We do a lot of like internal, like handouts and things that we give out to patients and their family members, but we don't use any specific service.
Yeah, and I'm not here to sound like a commercial. I'll tell you some for Treehouse Eyes. That's what we're using. Hoot does an incredible job of marketing practices and helping you talk with patients through presenting myopia management. And that's one of the things that Treehouse does. But they also do marketing through social media, and they do marketing in the area. They do SEO marketing and so forth like that. And then they're also helping with the marketing of when a patient is in your office. How do you talk to that patient so that you're able to convert that patient over? So I got an email today from Treehouse, and it's like, hey, so this person's in your area and they were searching for myopia management, and boom, and those are the sort of things where it's like, hey, I'll sign the check next month and, get more of those patients. One of the other things that we do that's really kind of cool, Craig, is we do some things called geofencing, where we're through our internet marketing, we're able to target certain areas that we feel may be more beneficial, or patients may be more likely to do myopia management. And we can specifically target through the internet with them so that when they're, on the Weather Channel or whatever, that there is an advertisement for myopia management. Facebook, we're certainly able to do some really incredible marketing through there where we're targeting specific age groups. So we may be targeting moms or dads at a certain age who are likely to have children. You could even, do socioeconomic classes, or you could do, what kind of jobs or careers those types of people are in. So you work with your marketing companies on how to best do that. And there's some really good ways. Sorry, that was a long answer, Craig. I'm supposed to be fast.
That's okay. Good answer, though. Good answer.
Okay, good.
So, Zinda, what are your typical failure rates with Ortho-K? So out of 10 patients fit with Ortho-K, what percentage do you have to put in some other modality instead?
When I think about the patients that I've had who have discontinued Ortho-K, some of the various reasons could be, a lot of it comes down to like handling and like the day-to-day having to wear the lens. So as some of my patients get older, they feel less comfortable with having to do a lot of maintenance overnight, and the consistency of wear is something that comes up a lot. And so sometimes, and like I said, this happens more as the patients get older, is that they're looking more for easier options and more consistent options. So if they sleep less, if they're, that their vision's not as blurry. So sometimes those things can get in the way. For some of the younger children who have had drop out of Ortho-K, some of them are like timing issues, which I try to encourage them, like I'm like, do you need more training? How can we have your parents help? But a lot of sometimes the younger children will get a little bit like stressed out. I feel really bad. I see a lot of more stressed out kids in this area who are worried about getting to school on time and that kind of thing, and taking the lens off in advance. some weird stuff, but again, I think a lot of the issues of dropout or potential dropout can be a lot of times alleviated with a conversation and just trying to understand the obstacles that the patients and the families are experiencing and trying to coach them to guide them to feel more confident.
Yeah. And hopefully you can decrease that number as well during the patient selection process if you can figure out in advance where one might be more prone to dropping out. Dave, what is the longest time? No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, conversely, I feel like in the practice that I'm at now, we've had some kids who are, heading off to college and they've been wearing Ortho-K for 10 years and they don't necessarily want to stop, but maybe their access to the office is less feasible. And so we have more so than the dropout, tons of kids who are continuing it onto a very, into early adulthood.
Yeah. That's a very insightful response on your part, because the question I was going to ask you was, what is the longest time you had a myopia management patient under your care? And it fits right into leaving around college age. So maybe 9, 10, 12, 15 years maximum.
Yeah, depending on when you start, for sure. But it is very much a long-term adventure in myopia management for a lot of these patients. And so those conversations early on of what modality is the best option for them, I think, is so key, because it is going to take up a lot of their adolescence and into early adulthood.
So Dave, you have, through optometric insights, a relationship of understanding students and knowing what's going on in for their future. And we have a question from a student that wants to know how they can start making relationships and gain the skills to gear their future practice during myopia management. How can they get better prepared today before they even leave optometry school?
Yeah, well, I think taking a special interest in the contact lens course and seeing if you can spend a little bit of extra time in a contact lens resident with a resident and kind of really diving into that. Obviously, taking the recommendations of the different courses that are out there. If you can get away to an optometry meeting that specifically specializes in myopia management, the Vision by Design or GSLS, and there's others, being on meetings just like this is really helpful. And then your pathway likely would include a contact lens residency. I happen to have one that focuses a lot on myopia management. And then go from there. I think it's awesome, and that's a great way to go. Can I comment on the last question too, Craig, really quick? Sure. So somebody did ask in the questions, so don't do Ortho-K on a -5 cylinder patient. And incidentally, the other question you had is, what's the longest patient you've had in myopia management? I don't know the answer, but I saw somebody yesterday who's been doing myopia management in our office. Actually, my resident saw them, who's been doing myopia management with us for 9 years. And he happens to have 5 diopters a cylinder in one eye and 4.5 in the other eye, and has been wearing Orthokeratology the entire time. We tried to move him out of Ortho-K. He's in college now, and he won't get out of it. He wants to stay in Ortho-K and is doing really well. So you can do it for 9, 10, 12, 15 years. I just wrote an article about myopia management in adults. Still something that is needing to happen. Had a 20-year-old who's a -15 who was at the office today. And so are we still doing myopia management on her? We're certainly talking to her about it. And yes, you can do -5 cylinder patients.
Yeah, that is true. Both of those answers, that there are certain parameters there the lenses are primarily available in, but sometimes outside those parameters result in really good results as well. As we start to wrap this up, if there's a question, do we have a biometer that would recommend for axial length measurement? I don't know that we want to recommend any one particular company. There's a handful of them today that are really fantastic, where we didn't have that capability just a few years ago. And I'd like to then just really ask you, Zinda, do you have any closing comments here for our audience that obviously is interested in building their practice. They wouldn't be attending a practice management type of presentation without that. And do you have any like tips? As I like to say, when they go back to the office tomorrow morning, is there a tip you could give them that they should institute to try to make their practice better relative to Ortho-K?
Yeah, I think, I kind of started with this at the beginning of this webinar, but I was saying that, I think myopia management is such a unique and very rapidly changing field in optometry, and one that I feel very lucky and fortunate to be able to care for children in my area in this way. I think that it's a wonderful way to build not only the connection with the child, but with the family and the community. So that's one thing that I think is very impactful and rewarding personally. And I think that, in terms of things that you can start with tomorrow, I think, like I said before, and I can't echo it enough, but the consultants are really there. They are your friends. They are there to help you. And I think that if you're feeling nervous about increasing the amount of Ortho-K you're doing, or maybe trying these crazy prescriptions like Dave is doing, trying to be more ambitious with your Ortho-K patient base, really reach out to your consultants. They are so helpful and have gotten me through a lot of hard times. So that, I think, would be the number one thing, because once your relationship with them builds, your confidence builds, your patients and your parents' confidence builds as well.
Terrific. David?
Yeah, so, we've talked a lot about myopia management because these are the low-hanging fruit for orthokeratology, but certainly adults are great in orthokeratology as well. Fantastic for our dry eye clinic. We really kind of focused more on myopia management, which I apologize for doing that, but certainly in the myopia arena for adults as well, or hyperopic for adults. One of the things I do want to close with in our conversation, even though I just said that around myopia, is the best thing with converting patients into myopia management is that you just can't stand myopia. If you see a patient tomorrow who is a myopic child, you're doing myopia management on them. If the answer is, well, let's wait and see what happens, we know what is going to happen. The results are already out there for us, and we know what is going to happen to that child. The growth charts are already built. We know what is going to happen. If they don't choose to do myopia management this year, they will need to do it in 6 months or a year, and you need to see them back for that. Orthokeratology is a great thing, and it's not that complicated to get into it now. Find a great laboratory that is going to be able to support you, that has implementation tools like these, the one that were presented here, and get started. Order your next lens. I had a doctor message me today. She said, I ordered my second Ortho-K patient. Now I've doubled what I've done for the year, right? And so she's just getting going. And you don't have to do 100, but if that, chart encourages you on the financial aspect, set a goal for next year. Try to do 1, 2, 3 a month, and you'll see that it really grows, because that word of mouth really can get patients going.
Excellent. I'd like to thank both of you for giving up your time. This is really quite enlightening tonight and very fascinating, and I feel quite confident that all of the viewers feel exactly the same way. I'd like to thank Euclid Vision Corporation for sponsoring it tonight, and I think if you are interested in building your practice or starting your practice relative to Ortho-K, contacting those folks at Euclid Vision Corporation would be a really great place to start. I'd also like to thank the Eyes on Eye Care folks for the work that they've done on the back end to make this happen. And most of all, thank all of you tonight for attending, and hope that you have continued success in the area of orthokeratology. Good night, everybody.